Hey, this is Editing Me. I just wanted to provide a quick trigger warning for the following topics, homophobia and homophobic slurs. They are prevalent topics in this video essay. Bye-bye! Most people in the LGBTQ+ community have heard about Stonewall. It's an event that was deeply important to kickstarting the gay rights movement in the 70s and forming a solid LGBTQ+ community. But what exactly was Stonewall? More importantly, what happened during and after the riots. In the 1960s, it was seen as unacceptable, and in most places except Illinois, illegal, to be gay. Bars where lesbian women, gay men, and drag queens were known to meet were raided by police frequently on false licensing charges. The Stonewall Inn was one such example of a gay bar. Owned by a crime family and used to profit off the closeted and the fearful, the Stonewall was located in Greenwich Village, a neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. Because of the immense profits that the inn generated, corrupt cops could often be bribed to tip off patrons and the owner that a raid was imminent. The night of June 27, 1969, however, was a different story. Police raided the building, arresting 13 people. A crowd quickly gathered, and one woman infamously shouted, "Why don't you guys do something?" into the cloud of people as she was being shoved into a police van. There was a general feeling of anger in the air. The days that followed the initial raid were colorful, to say the least. In the early hours of the first day, June 28th, pennies were thrown at the police, and angry shouts of "pigs" and "coppers" were hurled. The pennies soon escalated to bottles, and later to bricks and stones. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two very well-known transgender activists, were known to have been on the scene, and while legend says that Ms. Johnson threw the first brick, Johnson has stated that she only arrived on the scene after the rioting was well underway. During the 28th and 29th, the Stonewall did reopen, even though it had been torn apart by cops and could not serve alcohol. When chants of "gay power" and "we shall overcome" began, police were called back in, and tear gas was unleashed upon the crowd. In the days that followed the earlier, more intense riots, the Stonewall Inn became a gathering point for a storm of LGBT activists. The few instances of violence were more controlled during these days, with isolated skirmishes between cops and individual activists, rather than a whole angry mob. On July 2nd, 1969, activists protested the neighborhood newspaper, The Village Voice, and its coverage of the riots as the forces of the F-slur. The New York Daily News also used homophobic slurs in its coverage of the events. This was standard practice for the time. Publications would either ignore or mock LGBT activists in their writing. On June 28, 1970, a year after the events of the Stonewall riots, the Christopher Street Liberation March, which was organized by LGBT activists, began the first ever Gay Pride Week. Several hundred people marched up 6th Avenue toward Central Park, with more joining every street corner, until they became a crowd of thousands. Empowered by their New York brethren, LGBT activists in other states and cities started to plan their own gay pride parades and marches. So, what impact does this have on the activism of today? Well, for one thing, it shows us the importance of having a community to back you up. Because of the events of the Stonewall riots, the LGBTQ+ community drew together and found each other. Another important outcome was the fact that intersectionality, the allyship of people of color and women in the LGBTQ+ community, was brought into the light and shown to be essential to surviving and bringing down systems meant to keep individual groups of minorities silenced. When our voices join together, they create a sound so loud and so beautiful that you can't help but admire it. Also, the Stonewall riots gave us one of the most iconic celebrations we can get, Pride. Were it not for those first brave few, we wouldn't have the wonderful month of Pride we have now. Were it not for Stonewall and the overwhelming push for LGBT rights, thousands of gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and other LGBTQ+ people, myself included, would have to live their lives in denial, in the closet, feeling wrong about themselves and the world we live in.